Good afternoon. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. We have adapted our regular business education workshops at City Hall into these webinars until further notice. Please note, any website or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business license assistance, we strongly encourage the process of license and permits online. Please visit chicagobusinessdirect.org or you can call 312-74-GO-BIZ. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If to learn more about this program, please visit chicago.gov/business education. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. We encourage all attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Today's webinar is entitled Domestic Worker Contracts Employer Training, presented by the Director of Office of Labor Standards, Mr. Andy Fox. At this time, I will now turn this webinar over to Andy for us to begin.
Thank you so much, Stella. Hi, everybody. I put a question in the chat. I wasn't clear. I wanted to know where you were from. Not just where you're from, maybe in the 77 neighborhoods. I'm from Pilsen, but like what organization you were with. If you wish to share that, that would help a little bit. So I'm Andy Fox. I'm the Director of Labor Standards for the City of Chicago. In the municipal code, there's a section called Title VI, Worker Protections. So, business affairs and consumer protection. We've got business affairs and consumer protection. And within that, we have an Office of Labor Standards that was created through advocacy of worker centers and other worker rights organizations so that workers had a place where their rights could be exercised. We oversee minimum wage, paid sick leave, wage theft, the Fair Work Week ordinance, and today we'll talk about domestic worker contracts. Now, if you're a domestic worker, this is mainly an employer-focused training. It will be informative, but it won't be too legalese-esque. I'm hoping that we don't have too many attorneys here. No disrespect to you all who are attorneys here, but you have technical questions about certain subsections and meanings and definitions. This is supposed to be high level, just give you a feel for the important components of the law. And I'll talk about ordinances at the law level. And rules are under that. Rules clarify and provide guidance for law. So it's law, ordinance, rules, and sometimes we issue kind of public-facing documents that don't have the weight of law, don't have the weight of rules, but provide further information. Without further ado, let's advance. So the goal, the goal is to provide a little bit of clarity and some of the definitions of terms in the domestic worker contract requirement section of the municipal code. So that would include, but not be limited to, just the core requirements. I'll provide some links and discuss model contracts. I'll go through a few hypotheticals, not too many, because that sounds kind of legalese-esque. Again, that's not really a word, but we don't want to set it up so that it's not digestible by everybody. However, if you have tough questions, specific questions, because you're a practitioner, you're here on behalf of your company, you're here as a business owner, you're here as an attorney representing someone. You want to ask a question, I'm here to answer. That's the goal. Ideally, when people ask questions that help them do things, then they implement those things and we don't see complaints. My goal is the people are empowered to make decisions, interpret the law as written, and implement any components of the domestic worker contract requirement so that the Office of Labor Standards doesn't have to issue a subpoena for records and/or visit your job site to get records, ideally. So, who is a domestic worker? Well, there are approximately 56,000 in the Chicagoland area. Predominantly, we find that they are African American, Latinx, and Polish women. Often, English is a second language. And we know through research that when there is a family setting, it's either an agency, like a placement agency with a care worker, nanny, cleaning setup, house cleaning service, or it's between a family and that one worker. And the power dynamic is something we'll talk a little bit about today. But you can appreciate that some people who are doing domestic work might not benefit from higher level education. Maybe in their home countries, they had a certain level of education. Here in the United States, they haven't been able to continue that yet. But people don't always have an advantage when bargaining with families and agencies who have the benefit of legal support and/or superior education in comparison to the workers. Not to denigrate workers, of course. This is a space where we want to give a voice to workers. We wanted to level the playing fields. So today, as I said, we'll do some hypotheticals, answer some questions. None that are too tough. So to introduce, what is domestic work? Domestic work really frames it for us. If the work is domestic work, you can call your agency Andy's Handy Dandies or Andy's Cleanup Crew. But if it meets the definition of domestic work, it would be the worker could be a domestic worker. And if it's domestic work and we've got a domestic worker, which becomes the definition of a covered employee, when I see capital C, capital E, that means I'm talking about the definition in the ordinance, the definition in the municipal code, that would require a contract. So for example, if we have someone here who's got like a senior care placement business and or an owner who's got 5 or 10 people that work for her, I'll use her because a lot of times entrepreneurs in Chicago can be women and are. And so the owner's placing workers. My dad was sick, so we had workers coming to our house and they were domestic workers and they were with my father 24 hours a day. So there were multiple shifts of people coming in and out of the house. And thank God they came because he was in a really bad space and they were able to keep him safe. They would make sure he got his medicine. They would help him move around the house and make sure he didn't fall. It was really a savior for us. So that domestic worker, that placement worker that was in the house, if it were in Chicago, it would have required a contract. And that's really, first off, when we think of the powers of the Office of Labor Standards, is the work performed in Chicago? Now, if the business is located somewhere else, it's an app. Well, there's no hard store, there's no storefront here in the city of Chicago, doesn't matter to us. If the work is performed in the city of Chicago, it's covered work under the Municipal Code of Chicago. Chicago work, Chicago's laws. We've exercised and wrapped our loving arms around that work to protect workers in Chicago. So who is a domestic worker? Anybody have any ideas? Put in the chat who you think a domestic worker might be. A typical domestic worker, an atypical domestic worker. And while I'm waiting for some answers, I'll give you the definitions, because if it's one of these things, if the person is doing housekeeping, if the person is doing house cleaning, home management, nanny services, child care, child monitoring, caregiving, personal care, home health services for elderly persons, persons with illnesses, injuries, or disabilities who require assistance in caring for themselves, laundering, cooking, companion services, chauffeuring. Just think of typical, generally, we all know what domestic workers do. But this really defines what it is. We define that in the municipal code. It mirrors the Illinois Domestic Workers' Rights Act. They had a domestic workers, I think it's Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights at the state level. The city said, we need to do the same thing. We need to protect domestic workers here in Chicago. The Chicago minimum wage is higher than the state minimum wage. And so home rule authority is our ability to say within the city of Chicago, these are our worker protection laws. We've got a little bit higher minimum wage. It's, depending on who does the work. For me, domestic workers are in the highest category of minimum wage. Right now, it should be $15 an hour. $15 an hour. Last year, what was it? $14 an hour. And the previous year, $13 an hour. The previous year, $12 an hour. We are on a ramp to increase. This July 1st, the minimum wage will increase based on, anybody here know, how does the minimum wage increase? Who determines it? Is it just $1 each year or something else? So if you are an employer and people, maybe one day they're doing roofing, but the next day they're doing housekeeping. The next day they're a nanny. So if the work is domestic work, then it's a domestic worker, then it's covered. And it doesn't matter if they're independent contractors, if they're undocumented people, or if they file a W-2. We don't care about the classification of the worker. If the work is domestic work, it's covered in the city of Chicago. And covered means jurisdiction, power, the ability to enforce our labor laws over that type of work. So those are the categories. Those are the, oh, thank you, Olivia, for that. And LH, thank you for, yeah, LaShonda, someone who works in our home, companion aides, anyone working for a company who does those things, domestic workers or high demand, essential workers. Thank you, Veronica. These are frontline workers. You don't think the domestic workers got time off. Now, in a home where the mother or the father, if one of the care, and let me just strip away, if one of the people in the home, in a couple, if one of the partners stayed home, maybe they didn't need domestic work, but maybe in most situations, domestic workers are frontline essential workers. They didn't get days off. They didn't get pandemic pay. They work to earn a living. Now, the pandemic impacted a lot of it, but now we're trying to move beyond the pandemic. We're in recovery mode. The final category of domestic workers. So these are specifically enumerated. If you meet the definition on slide 6, one of these things, okay, that's easy. Oh, laundering, crap. Yeah, that's domestic work. I need to get a contract for that person. I've got people, I've got a small company, people are doing cooking services. Oh, I send a chef to the house? That's right. Cooking for Oprah. If I were Oprah's chef, be domestic work, I should get it. Even though I'm getting far over the minimum wage, I would still need a contract that would comply with the domestic worker contract requirement. And I would be a good chef. I'm just saying, I love pizza. On Fridays, I make pizza. During the week, I can cook about anything else, Italian or Mexican. Just saying. All right, finally, the final category. In other household services to members of households or their guests in or about a private home or residence or any other location where the domestic work is performed. This isn't what this is trying to say is there are some other things that might meet the definition, kind of a catch-all. Generally, we would look at these specific enumerated categories, right? And if we had a situation where it was one of those things, but not, oh, there's the chef. Someone just posted, I'm a chef. Well, looks like cooking meets the definition of domestic work. If you work, if you are if you're a sole employer, you don't have to cut a contract with yourself. But if you work for someone as a chef, they should have a contract. And that's the thing. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what does an employer have to give an employee who's going into homes doing domestic work, because that's probably why you're here, many of you. Now, contracting services do not, roofing, siding, floors, think of like contractors, subcontractors doing work, a little different than domestic work. These specific enumerated categories, it doesn't look like roofing is in there, right? It doesn't look like cleaning the garden. It's more in the home, traditional categories meeting this definition. There are a couple that might fit in here under other household services to members of households. Let's say I was a private masseuse and I came into that private home. probably domestic work. But changing a light bulb for a friend one time does not equal domestic work. There is some common sense at play when we apply the law to situations. I know it's challenging. Here's one of the most important features. All domestic workers, including domestic workers employed by employers with fewer than 4 employees, shall be covered employees. Why does that matter? Generally, in Chicago, the minimum wage is set up in tiers. If you have 21 or more employees, you have to pay the highest wage, which is $15 an hour. If you have 4 to 20 employees, you have to pay $14 an hour, and it ramps up a dollar next year. If you have less than 4, so 3 and less, it's called like a micro employer, you default to the state minimum wage. But in Chicago, we escalated the importance of domestic workers because they're the most vulnerable category and they're the most deserving of categories to get that highest tier of minimum wage. So all domestic workers, including domestic workers employed by employers with fewer than 4 employees, shall be covered employees. And notice the capital C, capital E, that means in the ordinance, it comes from a definition, regardless of W-2 status. You have a W-2, you have a 1099, you have no paperwork at all. If you're doing domestic work, you're covered in Chicago. So it really requires us to appreciate the spectrum. And forget part-time, full-time. A caterer, as LaShonda asks, would a caterer or events decorator fall into this? Well, caterer, possibly. Cooking. But I don't know. That sounds like bringing food inside a home. It's not specifically enumerated. Cooking in the home, probably. Bringing catered food into the home, have to look at it. So I don't know. Something to think about. Something to think about that other category. If it's not specifically enumerated, then it's not in one of those. Then we get into kind of the nuance of what the work actually is. That's a really good question, though, LaShonda. So the nuance, the spectrum. One time a month, I come in, I do house cleaning. We used to have a house cleaner. We can't afford her anymore because we were only doing it one time a month. She's like, listen, you guys are nice. You have a really nice house. She was amazing at cleaning the house. I love the smell of Fabuloso. It reminds me of how clean our house was. Soon as I opened the door, I was like, she was here, and the house was immaculate. But we only had one time a month in our budget. So it would be domestic work, but she needed more. She's like, I need more commitment out of you all. And we didn't have it. So one time of the week, I come in and do laundry, domestic work. 2 to 3 times a week, babysitter. Now we're moving into the spectrum where there's sometimes all the way on the right, to your eyes right, you have a live-in nanny and caregiver. This is a much different situation. You know, it might be an LLC, someone who's got a business who's coming in one time a month to house cleaning. Entrepreneurial, small business owner, and or the small business owner, workers coming in, doing that work. Very different than the live-in nanny and caregiver. In that situation, that's where people were more vulnerable. You know, luckily my dad wasn't a grouch. Those people who came in to take care of him, he's a sweet man. He was in a really bad way, but he didn't like all the people who came in, and I don't know if they liked him because a lot of times they just slept there. He was fine, and I'm very grateful they came. But a live-in nanny and a caregiver, think of kind of, I'm thinking of like all those shows where the nanny comes in and then the nanny's part of the family. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger took advantage of a nanny, didn't he? And had a relationship with a nanny. Not to become political here, but you see that when you live in a home 7 days a week, then it's very different. Then the negotiation of the contract might include like, okay, so where will I be sleeping in the house? Where do I take my breaks? How much food do I get? What kind of food do I prepare the food? Do I do homework? Do I do, what exactly are my duties? Those are the things that have to be negotiated for between the nanny, caregiver, before they come into a home. Now, most times an agency would spell that out for the family. Like, hey, listen, here are what we do and don't do. And my dad was so sweet. He didn't know that they could prepare food. He didn't know that they would clean his dishes. He didn't know they would do a lot of things. And some of them didn't offer. But the ones that were good to him, saved his life. And now he's in a much better space than he was back then. All right, so workers without documentation. This is the most vulnerable area. City of Chicago is a welcoming city. It does not inquire or require information related to immigration status. If I issue a subpoena, or if I send a letter to an employer or a family about a domestic work contract, I'm not asking whether or not the person employed there has paperwork. I don't communicate. We don't communicate with law enforcement, the Internal Revenue Service, the Illinois Department of Revenue about whether or not deductions were made. What we're trying to do is make the worker whole. And the jurisdiction is related to the worker right. So was minimum wage paid? Was paid sick leave paid? Did wage theft occur? Was there a contract? If there was a violation of the contract requirement, how can we help you get a contract in place? How can we help ensure that the employer has a contract that's negotiated for and agreed to by the employee, signed off on and implemented? We want to make things, workers whole, employers empowered to have the tools they need to protect workers, to have a good communication. And so that actually we have a contract. Thank you for the subpoena. Here it is. Adios. Thank you. We appreciate it. Now in the second box, all workers are entitled to labor protection regardless of their immigration status. It's that simple. Threats of retaliation, threats of deportation could involve federal authorities. And the Office of Labor Standards has T and U visa powers, so that if there is an investigation into a violation of a right, the Office of Labor Standards could sign on in a T or U visa application, which during the pendency of this investigation for some sort of labor law violation, that immigrant worker would not be able to be deported. So if someone is under threat of deportation, that's as low as they get. And it's part of that power dynamic that people use. Well, what are you going to do? I'm going to pay you $8 an hour. Are you going to call the police? Are you going to call the Office of Labor Standards? Yes, I am. And when they come out, there will be problems for you, employer. Just so you know. I'll jump this slide. So at a high level, at a low level, Chicago requires a minimum wage for employers who have 20 more employees, or if you have a domestic worker beginning July 1, 2021, $15 an hour. I asked the question earlier, I never answered it. For those who are monitoring how well I'm doing and not doing, I didn't answer this. What happens July 1, 2022? July 1, 2022, sorry, I put my fingers inappropriate. That's kind of, I was taught most of my language in Peru and Bolivia, and they taught that you're not supposed to point. It's just improper, Andy. Please tell me. Don't point. So July 1, 2022, the minimum wage will increase tied to the consumer price index, capped at 2.5%. So if the consumer price index is higher than 2.5%, it would be 2.5%. At the high end, if it's lower than 2.5%, or anywhere from 0 up to 2.5, that would be the increase of the minimum wage. We'll post that on or about June 1st. However, if unemployment is higher than 8.5%, just not, minimum wage will be capped. So June 1, approximately, we will post the new minimum wage. It will increase for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 employees in the city of Chicago. I hope I'm not going too fast. Along the way, if you have any questions, feel free. I don't want to meander too much because there's more to cover. So domestic workers are also required to get paid sick leave. These are just general rights. 1, they get minimum wage. 2, they get paid sick leave. Now, if you have a nanny who's a live-in, paid sick leave might apply. If someone, an employer, is sending out people to all different types of jobs, you have to track how many hours they work. Because if you have a domestic worker as one of your employees, if they work more than 80 hours in a 120-day period, they're eligible for paid sick leave. So if I work 10 hours a week in 1 month, I've got 40 hours. In 2 months, I have 80 hours. I would qualify for sick leave. And sick leave is just how many hours did you work? In 2021, I worked 1,000. So I would divide by 40 to determine how many hours of sick leave I've accrued. Paid sick leave accrues or adds up, you get 1 hour for every 40 hours you work. Now, in that spectrum, some people only work 4 or 5 hours a week, maybe 10 hours a week. They don't earn a lot of paid sick leave. But if you track it as the employer, then over time, at the end of the year, oh, okay, so you must give them access to their sick leave after no longer than 180 days. So it requires a maximum of 40 hours. So if I work 40 hours a week, 40 weeks, that's 40 hours I get at week 40. Capped at 40 hours. So people get sick leave. That's really the bottom line. It accrues at 1 hour for every 40 hours. You get a maximum of up to 40 hours. But if I don't work enough to earn 40 hours in the whole year, because I'm not going to say part-time, if I'm working less than full-time, if only working 20 hours, it would take me 80 hours to get 40. Then maybe at the end of the year, I've got 20 hours because I worked maybe 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week. I would accumulate hours. At the end of the year, I divide, or at the end of 6 months, I divide and say, okay, you've only got 2 days of sick leave. Well, 2 days is 2 days of paid leave. Half of that paid sick leave rolls over. So if your fiscal year ends December 31st, and I have 20 hours on the books that I haven't used, or I've got 8 hours, half of that end of year paid sick leave that's been earned rolls over and sits there at the beginning of year 2. And year 2, I work 40 hours, and 40 weeks, I have 40 hours, plus whatever rolled over, I would have that many hours to use in a year. So let's get to work here now. We've set the stage. Hopefully you're still paying attention and I haven't bored you into submission. So the new law, effective January 1st, 2022, says this: all employers of domestic workers shall provide, and I have added this emphasis for you, shall provide a written contract to the domestic worker, setting forth the wage and the work schedule agreed upon between the employer and the domestic worker. The employer shall provide the written contract to the domestic worker in the domestic worker's primary language upon the domestic worker's request. So if they speak Cambodian, Urdu, Spanish, Polish, if that's their primary language, get it translated into that language, provide them the contract. For employers, let's say you're in a family, you can access a contract through, we have some links I'll put up in a minute, but if you're an employer, you don't have to have a contract for every single solitary home the person goes to. You can have one contract that covers, hey, listen, you're going to work for Handy Andy's maid service, or Andy's Care Workers Anonymous, Andy's Care Workers Chi-Town, Chi Care Workers, whatever it is. Then I only have one contract between me, the employer, the business, you, the entrepreneur, and the domestic worker. It's not for each family you go out with. You might have terms that you negotiate with each family about what that domestic worker will do, but you can set the expectation between you're working for Andy Chi-Town Care Workers, you're my employee, here is the contract we have for you when you do domestic work. These are the kinds of things. You can speak generally, you can be specific, but there has to be some written document. And in that document, you should state the wage and the expected work schedule. So provide some, like you're going to be working day shifts, night shifts. It can't be so broad that it's unintelligible. It's overly broad. It's not specific enough. You'll work when I want you to. Or it might be better to say, most of your shifts will be between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. as needed. Generally, you'll do 3 to 4 jobs a week. You won't work Saturdays, or you won't work Sundays, or you will work these days. Set up the wage, the work schedule, provide it to them in their primary language. It has to be a contract, something that's signed off on by both parties, bargained for, and documented. And if that is fillable form, something that can be produced upon request, because you've got to retain the records about a contract 5 years. So, and it can be tough getting a contract in place. I can talk more about that in a minute, but let's keep moving. So each employer, as I said, shall maintain records for 5 years. You have to have the covered employee's name, address, hours worked, pay rate. You've got to have that wage agreement, the contract, and records to establish compliance with the law. That's retention of records. I issue a subpoena or I come knocking and I say, listen, I need your records for all your domestic workers. Well, we don't have domestic workers. We're an app. Dear app, Andy's app, mega national corporation has got, you know, Chi-Town care workers placement international. And we could subpoena the records of that entity to get records, and they should maintain the records for 5 years, including the covered employee's name, address, hours worked, pay rate, the contract, and records to establish compliance with the law. So again, I'm going to keep banging this home. It's got to set forth the wage. What will I be paid? If it changes, change the contract. What is my schedule? Day, night, mornings, afternoons. If you don't know, set forth some reasonable and cognizable attempt to be able to communicate the work schedule. Because let's say you say you're working days, we got it on the paper, and then all of a sudden you assign me nights. In essence, if I cut your wage or change your wage, if I cut your schedule or change your schedule, then arguably it's a layoff, and a layoff could involve the Illinois Department of Employment Security. In those wage records that you've been submitting, the Illinois Department of Employment Security could pay for their unemployment. And it's usually it's 26 weeks in a 52-week period, but it could extend much more during the pandemic, and it has. Not that there's any more money in the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, but generally unemployment is available for 26 weeks in a 52-week period. Not something you want to tinker around with, because that impacts the rate at which you're taxed. If everyone you hire gets laid off and they get unemployment because you're firing them improperly or you're laying them off when they shouldn't, then they could qualify for unemployment insurance, and that increases the taxable rate that you're charged as the employer. Payroll taxes. Not something for today, but something to think about. So the city of Chicago, in partnership with the Rise Chicago, made model contract templates available. And I don't know if I go too deep into it today, but there are a myriad of categories of issues. If you're here as a family interested in putting together a contract, go there, and these are templates. And it makes you think about common sense things. So if you're going to be doing care work, does that include homework for the kids? How many kids are in the home? What are the names of the kids? You kind of want to bind each other to what we're agreeing to. And those model contracts, not bind each other, but communicate and exchange notes about what we're talking about. Oh, no, you'll never be doing laundry. I have a person who does laundry. Nope, you'll never be babysitting for my kids. You'll just be taking care of my grandfather. We don't have any kids. So those details that seem like, why would we put that in a contract? Those details about who's in the home, who do I report to? What's the address? Who will I be getting my checks from? How often will I be paid? These common sense things that we all take for granted when we work for kind of normal businesses are covered in the contracts. If you're an employer, feel free to go there, look at the templates, and modify them as needed to suit what you're doing. There are different types of them, but know that you've got to set forth the wage, you've got to set forth the work schedule, and get it translated to the primary language of the worker. You can learn more at chi.gov/care. It's an entire web page kind of designed to help employers and workers understand the issue of domestic workers in the city of Chicago. So I promised hypotheticals, and here we are. Brace yourself. Drum roll, please. A business, and that basically, this was something else. I had a family who employs a care worker to do babysitting and senior care. So the employer establishes and maintains contract. I said it, but I'll say it again. It's the employer who has a contract with each employee. If you are a business, albeit small, planning to grow, you have employees who do babysitting and senior care. I was on my ride this morning. I went down Halsted to 111th Street, went east over toward Pullman, came up, and I saw a few senior care facilities. And I saw a few, I see a lot of dialysis centers on the way. But when you think of senior care, those people need a lot of help. And so there would be one contract for all placements. You don't have to have one for family X and family Y and family Z. One contract between the employer and the employee who's going out to care for the family. The negotiation between the employer. Oh, there's a question about where are the templates. Let me make sure I've got them. I'm going to let me make sure I have the right link. 1 second. Yeah, that's not working. I'm going to put up a different website. Here is one. This is the Your Home is My Workplace. I don't know if that has the contracts. And if you go to the Office of Labor Standards website, there it is. The domestic workers right side. So this, well, that is the Your Home is campaign, but the one I just put up. So I put up the link for slide 18. Let me get back to where we're, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to reshare because I'm lost. Sorry about that. There it is. Okay, can you all see that? I lost the chat. Where it is. There it is. Can everybody see that? No, I need to get to the full. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. So if you could click on that link, I'll put it in again. That has the actual contracts. It should have the link over to, or you could just Google Arise Chicago Domestic Workers. Sorry about that. And I know that McKenna asked the question, often the payor and the manager of the employee are different. Are both of their signatures required? Well, if there was a contract, that would really be for you to decide. And the payor and the manager might be different. I don't know if a manager has to sign off on it, but there should be a contract between that worker and the entity. That would be for you to figure out. If you have any issues with it, I'll give you my email a little later in the show, and we can work on that just in case you need a follow-up on that. All right, so back to the example. Where is it? There it is. So what terms to include? We talked about it. You got to get that wage and work schedule, preferred language, go over work responsibilities. Is it household care? Is it food, meal planning, cooking, feeding? If you are a family, hiring someone, use that model contract as a guide. But if you're an employer and you're going to be doing a lot of contracts, it might be an area where you need to get a little legal support to make sure that you are complying with kind of the expectations of what your business model is. The contracts that are there are for different types of care workers. And there are a lot of terms. They're up to 26 terms. I was going to do a slide on it, but then I'm going to run out of time and it might overwhelm. Those three core features of the model contract requirement are where we want to focus our attention. And the other information, it kind of helps. Okay, so am I going to be doing like house cleaning is a very different contract than a nanny who's doing live-in work, because then you've got to think about, so where's my room? What are any deductions that you think you're going to be taking? Meal and rest breaks are really important if you're a live-in nanny. Some people try to charge nannies rent, say, listen, I'm going to pay you $500 a week, but because we're giving you this room, I'm going to take out $200. And that can be abused by people. So that's where federal law might kick in about appropriate meal and rest breaks. There's also the 1-day rest in 7. So even though a nanny is placed in the home and they're physically there 7 days, doesn't mean they have to work 7 days in a row. And SH asks, does it have to be 14 pages long? And so Sylvie, the answer to that is you need to stick to the core terms. Use those as a model contract and tailor them to your needs. So you could work through those. That would be the panoply of information, the full bevy of everything in the menu. Ideally, you would talk about all those things. But I'm looking, if I'm asked, if someone makes a complaint to the Office of Labor Standards, I don't have a contract, and a contract is produced that sets forth the wage, the work schedule, and the primary language. It could be a 1-page document. And it's sufficient that both parties sign off on it. That could be the contract. So I guess the answer, I don't know if I'm ready. And the other question is, would you like us, I think there's have our current contract assessed to make sure everything's included, or maybe email someone who can review it. I don't know if we would probably look at it, but I resist taking on that job. I'll say that much. We want to empower you to do what you need to do best. Ideally, you would get legal counsel for it. I'm not your lawyer, but I want to help you as employers and good participants in the economy of Chicago to the best we can. So I will give you my email toward the end of this, if that helps. You'll have to email me because I'm not taking notes of emails, and I'll give that to you in a minute. All right, so if you're a family or household with senior and caregiver, the main job type is senior care, individual special needs, work responsibilities. You know, think of taking care of seniors, it's bathing, dressing, toileting. Is that food prep? Maybe not. Is it caring and cleaning the house? Maybe not. Breaks and rest periods if all night? Probably, but maybe not. You have to work on those issues. Deductions for rent, as I said, be careful. Fair Labor Standards Act could clamp in if you're deducting certain things from workers where you shouldn't be. And I hope this isn't a real business. I just made this up, Maids R Us. Let's call it Shy Maids R Us, just to make sure it's not an actual entity. House cleaning, nanny services, senior care, whatever else. Be careful. Is it domestic work? So there's an app and it has a bunch of different opportunities. You can get painting done. You can get house cleaning done. You can get your dog walked. Wait a minute, last time we were here, people were asking about dog walking. Well, if I show up and I take your dogs out of the house, that doesn't sound like domestic work. But if I show up and I live in your home, taking care of your dogs while you travel the world, because you're an influencer, going to Iceland, going to Boulder, doing all these magnificent things. I'm living in your home, taking care of the home, taking care of your dogs. I'm actually called a dog sitter. It might be domestic work. So be careful also when people are paid per job, because what we would look at, if you have an employer and you're paid job 1 takes 2 hours, and then there's job 2, you have to drive to the next job 2 hours, drive to the next job 1 hour, 2 hours. During the day, there's like 10 hours where the person is performing work for one employer. It feels like 2 or 3 jobs of 2 hours each paid per piece. But we would look at also potentially that travel time, because if you're doing the work for one employer, generally commuting isn't included. But if I'm going from job to job to job, we might look at it from a minimum wage analysis. So where you're paying per job, make sure it exceeds a minimum wage and make sure that you carefully attribute for potentially any travel time. And who signs the contract? I think someone so aptly put it up earlier about, who is it? The payor? Is it the manager? You would have to figure out who as an entity do we want signing off on the contract with the employees. Think of like the new hire packet. Whose name is on the forms that the employees sign off on? And it's kind of, we communicate on behalf of Chi-Town Maids or us to Andy to clean homes. And so whose name on it is something you'll have to think about. So I've got a couple links here. This is that domestic workers site one. Let me click on it and see if it pops up. Oh yeah, it does. That is the domestic worker rights page. Great page. Down below there, if you click it now. Oh, I'm sorry, Olivia. Olivia wants to go back to slide 19. We're here to accommodate. Family or household with senior caregiver, main job type, senior care, individual special needs, convalescent care, bathing, dressing, toileting. And so the question comes back, wait, so if I'm sending someone into the home, I don't want them to say, well, I don't do dog walking. I don't clean dogs. No, sir. And me, I love dogs. I'm allergic. I don't love cats as much as I love dogs. So I got a problem with dogs. So if there's a dog on site, time out. Birds, oh no. Lizards, no, I'm not cleaning the lizard cage. I'm here to take care of grandma. Granny needs my attention and I'm here to do it, but I'm not cleaning the bird cage. I'm not working with lizards or snakes or some other animals. Okie dokie. What about food? I'm there overnight. Do I bring my own food? Things you want to work through, because just when you think everything's cool and you've hired all the right people, you're a small business owner, right? And it's all going well and God, everything's great. One person can turn over the whole apple cart. And that one person might say, we got rights. And they do. Let's call that Office of Labor Standards. I saw one of his videos. Man, they're in trouble. We're not getting sick leave. I'm not getting minimum wage. What about these breaks and rest periods? Ooh, I'm gonna write a complaint and send it on over there. They're busted. And everyone else is like, well, wait, we're supposed to get this, we're supposed to get that. Next thing you know, the environment that you so carefully cultivated, all these lovely people who share in your mission and send out to homes, and your business is booming. And now there's something in social media that such and such happened. I don't envy those who have businesses carefully protecting their brand and legacy. It's very hard. So thank you for helping us recover, and thank you for making Chicago vibrant. There's our website. Not that you want to watch more videos, but there are videos on the minimum wage, paid sick leave, fair work week. On the next slide, I provide, there is the BACP labor standards email. That is the email. They're investigators, really nice. And I go into that website sometimes when there are too many unanswered ones, or they're tricky domestic worker contract questions from law firms or other practitioners that involve kind of a local, state, federal implications. We go in there, we try to answer them to the best of our ability. Our website is chicago.gov/labor standards. Our office phone, 744-2211. It looks like there's some voicemail in there now, but there are 5 people who should pick up that phone right now if you call and ask questions. If you don't get an answer within a couple of days, I would go to the email and say, hey, listen, I called earlier and I haven't gotten a call back. Email bacplaborstandards@cityofchicago.org. And if you want to say, listen, I've got a question about domestic worker contracts, if you'd be so kind to review it. We try our best. We're not perfect. That's slide 22 of 22. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, the agreements are, Blanca, the agreements are available in Spanish. I'm pretty sure they're available in Polish also. The templates. If you go to Arise Chicago. Any questions? I'll maybe count down to 10. Thank you, Blanca. So I would really like to thank everybody for attending. I'll kind of end slowly, just in case anyone has any last minute questions, but feel free to send more specific questions, practitioner questions, questions you don't want to put in the chat right now, or call the office. If we can't answer it immediately, we'll put some work to it. We want you to invest in the economy, to work well, to be in compliance, and to do what you do best. So I want to thank you all. I really appreciate your attendance. I hope I wasn't too slow or too low or too fast or whatever it might be. But thank you all so very much and have a lovely day. Stella, do you want to close us out? Stella probably has some closing remarks.
Yes, I do have some closing remarks. Thank you, Andy, for your very informative webinar. Like all, your webinars are always great. I'm always paying attention. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program and would like to receive credit for today's webinar, please send an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, that email is bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Thank you again, Andy, and thank you to all of our attendees. To find out about upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/business education. Again, that's chicago.gov/business education. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.